just can't help but to focus right on this building.
Looked us up and she looked us down. She said, don't go messing me.
One store that has remained a fixture on one of the busiest corners.
They vanished without warning. Those sacred aisles, neon signs, and Saturday rituals that once defined our childhoods, now buried beneath parking lots and silence. What happened to the places that made us feel like anything was possible? And why does their disappearance still ache like a memory we never meant to lose? S.H. Crest and Company was not just a department store. It was the heartbeat of a downtown era we have long buried under strip malls and sterile plazas. The buildings alone were masterpieces, Art Deco dreams with copper canopies and bold glass fronts that felt more like theaters than stores. You could walk in and feel the hum of the crowd, kids sipping sodas at the lunch counter, mothers thumbing through bolts of cloth, and the smell, a mix of waxed floors, popcorn, and something sweet baking behind the scenes. Crest was where your grandmother bought her Sunday gloves, where your parents found school supplies for a dime. It made shopping feel like an occasion. These were the kinds of places where time moved slower, where you felt like you belonged. But what really made Crest unforgettable was its sense of place. It was always downtown, always near the courthouse or city square. It was the anchor of Main Street, nestled in with shoe shines and diners. On Saturdays, families made an event of walking there, pressing faces against the glass displays before heading inside to feel the soft fabric of new dreams. And when Crest fell, it was not just a brand that disappeared. It was a rhythm, a ritual, a piece of local culture. The buildings were repurposed into sterile chain pharmacies, or worse, left to rot. What was once magical became mundane. How did we let something so beautiful become background noise? Montgomery Ward began as a lifeline, a bold promise that anyone, anywhere in the country, could share in the American dream. It started with the catalog, a book thick as a Bible, landing with a thud on farmhouse tables across the country. Children would pore over it, circling bicycles and toy trains. Mothers would dog-ear dresses and linens. Fathers eyed radios, tools, and gadgets. It brought the city to the country, hope in ink and staples. But when the company transitioned into physical stores, the dream expanded. By the 1970s, Montgomery Ward was a fixture in malls and shopping centers. It had everything: furniture, clothes, appliances. A one-stop shop that respected your time and your paycheck. The red sign felt dependable, like a trusted neighbor. You knew it would be there next week, next year. Ward's wasn't flashy, but it was fair. It was honest. It stood for the solid middle class that powered the country. But the world changed. Flash won out over function. Competitors raced ahead with newer tech, slicker branding, and deeper pockets. And Montgomery Ward, practical, sturdy, kind, couldn't keep pace. The doors closed, the lights went dark, and all that remained were the catalogs in attics and the echoes in abandoned malls. Did we lose a store, or the part of ourselves that believed in building something slowly, steadily, and with care? Gimbals was the city's second favorite, but first in our hearts. Overshadowed by Macy's, it never quite got the glory. But Gimbals had grit. It had soul. Where Macy's sparkled, Gimbals grounded. Its Thanksgiving parade came first. Its windows were full of wonder. When you walked through its doors, you didn't feel intimidated. You felt welcomed. It was the kind of place where children pressed their noses to snowy glass in winter, watching elves move on little motors and wooden toys dance in perfect rhythm. It was where your parents met on a lunch break, or where you got your ears pierced, or where grandma worked behind the glove counter for 20 years. The ceilings were high, the marble scuffed, and the escalators slow. But that was the charm. Every floor had its story. The basement had deals. The top floor had class. The middle? That's where the memories lived. Gimbals was an anchor of routine, joy, and city life. But like many department stores, it was caught in a changing tide. Fast fashion, discount giants, and the rise of suburban malls pulled the rug out. And soon the parades ended, the windows went dark, and the neon sign flickered off one last time. The space it held in the skyline was replaced, but the space it held in our lives, irreplaceable. How did we forget the store that remembered us? Ames did not pretend to be elegant. It did not offer fine dining or perfume counters. But it was ours. In towns with no fancy malls or upscale plazas, Ames stood tall. Its red sign was a banner of welcome. You went there when the kids needed backpacks, when the faucet broke, or when you just wanted to walk the aisles and feel normal. Ames was warm linoleum under your feet, soft lighting from humming fluorescents above, and the quiet assurance that you would find what you needed and afford it. Parents shopped there after long shifts. Grandparents stretched retirement checks just a little further with a sale on flannel sheets. There were no frills, but every visit mattered. Kids would beg for a toy, teens would flip through racks of jeans, and once in a while, everyone left with something unexpected. Ames was small-town survival in store form. But as retail competition tightened and corporate strategies faltered, Ames started to disappear. One store closed, then another. Whole regions were left without a replacement. The buildings lingered, ghostly and hollow. And for the families who once relied on them, it felt like being forgotten, not just as consumers, but as people. Why are the first to serve always the first to fall? Caldor was quiet confidence, a discount store with taste. It never screamed at you with neon signs or carnival-like sales. Instead, it offered value in a calm, dignified way. Walk through the doors, and everything felt in order. The layout was smart, the prices were fair, the brands surprisingly good. For families in the Northeast, Caldor was the go-to for almost everything. You could buy a warm winter coat and matching mittens, pick up light bulbs, and browse the electronics aisle, all without fighting through chaos. Caldor was where fathers bought toolkits they actually used, and mothers found tasteful decor that did not cost a paycheck. Kids loved the toy aisle, bright, clean, and just adventurous enough. The clerks knew the regulars. You could ask questions and get real answers. It felt like shopping for adults, honest and efficient. But then came the tidal wave. Big box superstores with deeper discounts and endless inventory. Walmart, Target, the giants. And slowly, Caldor's calm faded under pressure. Budgets tightened, shelves thinned, and eventually the chain folded. The sign came down, the lights turned off, and the neighborhoods it served were left with louder, colder options. Caldor may not have had a catchphrase or a commercial jingle, but it had heart. And that was more than enough. Why does dignity always seem to lose in the age of excess? Zellers was chaotic in the best possible way. Bright signs, noisy crowds, endless shelves stacked with everything from toaster ovens to tube socks. It was not fancy, but it was alive. Zellers stores buzzed with energy, especially in the 70s. You never knew what you would find, and that was the magic, the hunt, the chance to stumble across a deal so good you had to tell your neighbors. Zellers was the kind of place where your mom could outfit the whole family and still have enough left over to buy ice cream on the way home. It was scrappy, unapologetic, loud in both color and character. It helped pioneer the idea of discount retail before that was even a buzzword. But success led to ambition, and ambition led to overreach. By the late 80s, the brand had fragmented, rebranded, and eventually disappeared. Yet anyone who grew up near one will tell you it had soul. Not polish, soul. How do you put a price on that? Bradley's felt like a neighborhood you could shop in. It was not the biggest store on the block, but it was the one that remembered your face. Especially in the Northeast, Bradley's was as familiar as the post office or the local diner. It had those narrow aisles lined with basics: socks, sweaters, toys, and towels. But there was warmth there, too. Some stores even had snack counters where tired shoppers could recharge with a soft pretzel or soda. You could walk in needing a winter coat and walk out with holiday lights and a smile. It was not fancy, but it felt like home. Bradley's made you feel like you belonged, no matter what you earned or wore. And then one day, it was gone. A few liquidations, a final clearance, another sign taken down, another memory paved over. And in its place, usually nothing, just an empty building echoing with what used to be. Why do our most comforting places always seem to vanish first? Hess's was pure spectacle. It was more than just a department store, it was a show. The kind where the windows danced at Christmas, where the escalators felt like magic carpets, where elegance was not just sold, it was performed. Based in Pennsylvania, Hess's knew how to make shopping feel like a celebration. The clothes sparkled, the displays turned heads, and the restaurant upstairs? Legendary. Mothers in their Sunday best would bring their children for a treat, teaching them that stores could be destinations, not just errands. Hess's knew the value of a good impression. In the 70s and 80s, it stood for fashion, fun, and a bit of fantasy. Then came the slow crumble. Ownership changed hands, the sparkle dimmed, and what was once a jewel of community pride became just another ghost of retail past. How do you say goodbye to a place that once made you feel so alive? Strawbridge Cloier was not just a store, it was Philadelphia royalty. When you walked through its grand doors, you felt like you were stepping into a chapter of history. Everything from the marbled floors to the stately columns whispered of another era. It was refinement without arrogance, tradition without snobbery. In the 70s, it managed the impossible, holding on to old-world charm while adapting to suburban sprawl. The stores outside the city had just as much grace as the flagship downtown. Strawbridge Cloier was a place where school uniforms were bought, wedding gifts were chosen, and Christmas shopping became a ritual. Salespeople wore suits. Packaging was elegant. It was an experience, not just a transaction. But time caught up, and slowly, that air of dignity was replaced by the hum of sameness. Mergers, rebrands, closures. And one day, you looked around and realized the grand old name was nowhere to be found. What happens when we lose the places that taught us how to carry ourselves? Bonwit Teller was for dreamers. The kind of dreamers who saw elegance in every stitch and believed that a perfume counter could change your entire mood. Bonwit was not just upscale, it was aspirational. The windows alone were legend, sometimes even designed by artists who would later be icons. When you walked inside, it felt like New York wrapped in velvet. It smelled like powder and promise. You did not just shop there, you arrived. For decades, it was the place where debutantes found their gowns, where the city's elite browsed under chandeliers, and where fashion took itself seriously. Even if you could not afford anything, you went just to feel it, to be part of it. But fashion is fickle. The brand lost ground, the name was sold, and eventually the flagship store was demolished to make room for a skyscraper. Bonwit Teller disappeared not with a whimper, but with a wrecking ball. How do you measure the loss of something that once made people believe in beauty? Maison Blanche was not just a department store, it was a southern landmark dressed in marble and tradition. Nestled in the heart of New Orleans, its grand columns and ornate detailing whispered stories of elegance from another time. For decades, Maison Blanche stood as a beacon of hospitality and high style, where white-gloved attendants welcomed every guest with a gentle smile and a gracious, "Good morning?" Inside, it smelled like powder and pralines. The air was soft with perfume and the displays shimmered with gold and lace. You went to Maison Blanche not just to buy a dress, but to feel like you mattered. Its Canal Street flagship was more than a building, it was a civic symbol, woven into the soul of New Orleans like jazz in the quarter. There were parades outside and weddings inside. Birthdays were celebrated at the counter, and Christmas meant a visit to Mr. Bingle, their beloved snowman mascot. But as chain retailers closed in and tastes changed, the store lost its footing. Mergers chipped away at its identity until the name itself vanished. What does it say when a place so full of spirit becomes a footnote in a brochure? Krauss was the people's department store, the practical cousin to Maison Blanche, sitting right across the street in New Orleans, humble and real. It did not pretend to be glamorous. Instead, it prided itself on being useful, functional, familiar. You could walk in off Canal Street, still sweaty from the heat, and find everything from fabric to fans to furniture. Krauss had no pretensions. What it had was heart. You would see grandmothers shopping for Sunday hats next to college kids picking up typewriters. It was the place you could buy buttons by the scoop or watch a shoe repair while sipping an ice-cold soda. Krauss was open late, and that alone made it a staple in a city that never slept. But more than that, it felt like a part of your family. Its winding aisles and dusty charm made it a comfort in an ever-changing world. And then, just like that, it closed in the early 1990s. Quietly, without fanfare. For a city known for its music and mourning, it was a strangely silent goodbye. And maybe that hurt more than anything. How does a store feel more human than the buildings that replaced it? Rich's was more than just a store to Atlanta. It was the city's beating heart during the holidays. Every year, crowds would gather beneath the flickering lights of the department store's enormous Christmas tree, hoisted high atop its downtown roof. There was a magic to it. As snow machines pumped flakes into southern skies, you could feel the hum of shared wonder. Rich's brought families together, at the Pink Pig monorail, through its iconic Magnolia Room tea room, or just under the warm glow of its holiday windows. But even outside of December, Rich's held weight. It was where Southern charm met civic pride. The salespeople knew your name. The clerks would wrap gifts with care and tie the bows just right. Kids bought their first suits there. Brides picked out silver, and everything, from linens to love letters, was laced with a quiet dignity. When the store was absorbed into Macy's in the early 2000s, something unspoken disappeared with it. Not just the building, not just the brand. A piece of Atlanta's soul faded into memory. When did convenience become more important than tradition? Berdines was Florida sunshine wrapped in cellophane and sold with a smile. Known as the Florida Store, it wore that name like a badge of honor. Palm trees decorated its bags. Themed merchandise captured the color and chaos of coastal life. Flamingo pink, ocean blues, citrus everywhere. Walking into Berdines felt like walking into a beach day you did not have to plan. There were swimsuits in winter, linen dresses with tropical flair, and beach towels on permanent display. Tourists loved it. Locals loved it more. It had everything a Floridian needed, even if they didn't know they needed it. And yet, beyond the flip-flops and novelty mugs, Berdines meant more. It was family. Generations shopped there. Grandparents held hands with toddlers near the escalators. Teenagers bought their first back-to-school outfits. Berdines told a story of place, of sunshine and joy, and the soft buzz of ceiling fans in July. But like many regional giants, it was folded into something bigger, faceless. Macy's again. And when the name disappeared, it felt like the beach got bulldozed. Can you still call it home when the welcome sign is gone? Cain Sloan was a Nashville original, unpolished, dependable, and quietly refined. It stood tall downtown, watching the city grow up around it. It was not flashy, but it never needed to be. This was where you bought your first prom dress or your best church suit. The wooden floors creaked with history, and the staff treated you like a neighbor, not a number. It felt local because it was. Cain Sloan hired local, spoke local, knew the rhythm of the community. You could spend an afternoon there, not even buying a thing, and still feel like you belonged. Whether it was record players, kitchenware, or perfume, the store carried the kind of dignity that never goes out of style. But like too many others, it was bought, merged, and eventually erased, this time by Dillard's. The transition was quiet. A change in signs, a shift in tone. And before anyone had time to mourn, Cain Sloan became another name on a list of stores that used to matter. What happens to a city's spirit when all its cornerstones are turned to stone? Joskys was Texas pride under one ornate roof. Towering over San Antonio with its palatial stone architecture, Joskys felt less like a store and more like a courthouse of retail dreams. You could see it from blocks away. Inside, there was elegance in every detail. Marble floors, carved banisters, chandeliers that lit the perfume counters in soft gold. Joskys was where you went for major moments. Communion dresses, wedding china, the perfect suit for Sunday service. Families marked their calendars around Joskys sales, and for many, the store was stitched into every milestone of life. The clerks were old-school kind, attentive, proud of their craft. Even when you left empty-handed, you walked out taller. Joskys made you feel important. But no store can stand forever, and as chains crept in, the familiar faded. The flagship downtown was sold, and eventually the Joskys name disappeared altogether. For San Antonio, it was like losing a landmark and a loved one all at once. What do we become when the places that shaped us no longer exist? Stearns was the middle ground between prestige and practicality, a department store with big city flair and suburban accessibility. It lived mostly in New York and New Jersey, tucked inside malls or looming over bustling avenues. Stearns knew its shoppers. It gave them flash without arrogance, glamour they could touch. Whether it was a sharp blazer for a job interview or a glittery dress for prom, Stearns was the kind of place you could find both, on sale. The lighting was warm, the music always just right, and the dressing rooms carried decades of whispered stories. Families went there after Sunday brunch. Teenagers worked there on the weekends, and every season brought a new catalog that felt like a personal invitation. But like a whisper in a crowded room, Stearns' voice was drowned out by the bigger, bolder giants. Macy's once again claimed the brand and phased it out. Malls lost their anchor. Communities lost a name they had trusted, and people who grew up on Stearns were left with only memories. Can you really replace a place that knew your taste better than you did? Best Products was the strangest, most brilliant shopping experience America ever forgot. You did not walk into a Best, you discovered it. Some stores had facades that peeled open like puzzle boxes. One looked like it had been broken in half. Another let trees grow right through the building. And inside, it was a treasure hunt, a showroom of possibility. Catalogs in hand, shoppers wandered a maze of displays, everything from stereos to sofas to science kits. You placed your order, then waited. Like magic, your item would appear, gliding down a conveyor belt from the mysterious warehouse beyond. Best was not just a store, it was theater. It made shopping feel futuristic, like you were participating in something just a little more clever than the average strip mall run. But its quirkiness was also its curse. As retail shifted toward big box convenience and immediate gratification, Best's charm started to feel like a delay. Slowly, the catalog orders stopped. The doors shut. The magic faded, and the buildings, those architectural marvels, were repurposed, gutted, forgotten. How did we lose something so boldly original without even noticing? Whitefront was the kind of place you remembered by its size alone. With massive arches and sprawling floor space, it looked more like a stadium than a store. West Coast families would pile into the station wagon and head to Whitefront like it was an event. Everything was big. Big signs, big savings, big expectations. You could get tires, patio furniture, baby clothes, and even goldfish, all in one trip. It was an early version of the superstore before anyone coined the term. But for all its bigness, Whitefront felt surprisingly intimate. It was where you bumped into neighbors, where kids got their first bikes, where your dad grumbled about prices but still bought the set of screwdrivers. There was something cinematic about it. And then, as quickly as it grew, it was gone. Bankruptcies came. Locations closed. The arches that once loomed over suburbia were torn down or converted into something colder. And just like that, the megastore with a human soul disappeared from memory. How do you explain to a generation raised on sleek chains what it felt like to shop somewhere that felt both epic and homey? Two Guys sounded like a joke, but it was a legend. A department store born out of a discount electronics business, it exploded in popularity across the Northeast, offering groceries, clothes, sporting goods, and televisions all under one roof. You could walk in for a loaf of bread and leave with a set of tires. It was that kind of place. Wild, convenient, surprisingly warm. Two Guys had wide aisles, quirky signage, and employees who felt like someone's uncle. It was unpretentious to the core. The prices were low. The inventory was massive. It was a blue-collar dream, affordable, efficient, and always buzzing with energy. Parents trusted it. Teenagers worked in it. And kids grew up trailing behind carts filled with half of everything. But as competition grew and expansion costs piled up, the company stumbled. By the 1980s, most stores were closed or sold off. The name vanished, but the nostalgia stayed. For anyone who shopped there, it was more than just two guys. It was your guys. Why do the best ideas always seem to burn out right before their time? Corvettes was loud, unapologetic, and decades ahead of its time. Long before discount retail became a buzzword, Corvettes was already doing it, and doing it with flair. Its music department was legendary, a vinyl lover's paradise with rows upon rows of records stacked like treasure chests waiting to be cracked open. The electronics section, a neon wonderland filled with radios, televisions, cassette decks, and dreams. This was the place where teenagers begged their parents for the newest album and fathers lost track of time comparing stereo systems. But Corvettes had more than tech. It was a full-blown department store where you could buy clothes, shoes, cosmetics, and even furniture without breaking the bank. Everything was stacked high, the aisles buzzing with working-class families who knew a good deal when they saw one. The sales were famous. The chaos was constant, but it worked. It made sense. Corvettes knew its customers. People who wanted quality, not polish. Value, not vanity. And for a while, it thrived. But as the discount boom exploded in the 1980s and big box stores flooded the market, Corvettes couldn't hold the line. The stores became outdated. The charm turned to clutter, and the music finally stopped. For those who remember it, Corvettes wasn't just a store. It was the soundtrack to a simpler, scrappier era. When did shopping stop being so much fun? SKlein on the square was New York City grit wrapped in sharp collars and sales tags. This was not your Fifth Avenue showroom. This was Union Square, honest, fast, crowded. You pushed your way through the entrance and into a world where designer names hung on metal racks, stripped of pretense, waiting for someone who knew value when they saw it. SKlein did not cater to the Upper East Side. It served the ones who worked there. Garment workers, students, single moms, newlyweds. It was where a secretary could find a coat that made her feel like a queen without draining her week's paycheck. The slogan said it best. On the square. Fair prices, no frills, all heart. The basement smelled of leather. The escalators clanked like subway cars. It was noisy, it was rushed, but it was real. There was pride in finding the right deal. SKlein's windows were never glamorous, but they were honest. You did not go to Klein's for champagne service. You went because you wanted to walk out with something beautiful and know you earned it. But New York changes. The building was sold, the lights dimmed, and eventually SKlein became one more memory crushed under gentrification. What do we lose when cities forget the stores that dressed their workers? Blatz was Chicago's beating blue-collar heart, tucked between factories and apartment flats, promising value to families who counted every dime. From the outside, it looked plain, no gold leaf or architectural flourish, but inside, it felt like home. Every inch of shelf space mattered. Clothes were practical, prices were honest, staff were local and friendly, always ready to help, never hovering. There was no shame in shopping at Blatz. It was a point of pride. A place where working people could walk in, buy shoes for every kid, a winter coat, school supplies, and a frying pan, all without leaving broke. The flagship store on State Street spanned multiple floors, humming with chatter, laughter, and clinking cash registers. You would see grandmothers guiding grandchildren through crowded aisles, factory workers still in their uniforms grabbing gifts on payday, and kids darting toward toy bins with wide eyes. Blatz understood the struggle. That was its secret. It did not pretend to be more than it was. And that made it matter even more. But as Chicago grew, changed, and shifted upscale, Blatz was left behind. The company tried to expand too fast, too wide, too soon. When the decline hit, it was slow but brutal. Stores closed, jobs vanished, and what once stood for working-class strength became just another empty lot. Who looks out for the everyday family when the stores that served them are gone? The Broadway was Hollywood's closet, the glamorous department store where movie star dreams met everyday life. Anchored in Los Angeles, the Broadway understood its audience, not just the actors and agents, but the hairdressers, the secretaries, the hopefuls, and hard workers trying to look the part. It was fashion-forward, polished but approachable, offering the trends of Paris and New York without the pretense. You could walk in wearing jeans and still get treated like you owned the town. The escalators glided you into worlds of chiffon and velvet, perfume and pearl, each floor a different act in a perfectly rehearsed show. Young girls bought prom dresses that made them feel famous. Brides picked out their gowns to the soft echo of muzak and ringing registers. There was a magic to it, glamour on a budget. And every December, the Broadway's holiday displays shimmered like set designs, casting their glow on shoppers below. But style is a fast-moving tide, and the Broadway could not outpace it forever. Mergers came. May Company took the name. Eventually, the lights dimmed, the makeup counters went quiet, and Los Angeles lost a piece of its sparkle. The city kept growing, but something softer, kinder, faded with it. What is fame worth when no one remembers where they found their first mirror? Robinson's was elegance on the Pacific breeze. Based in Southern California, this department store defined refined West Coast living for generations of families who craved something a little more polished than the typical strip mall scene. Robinson's felt calm, sophisticated. You walked through its doors and into cool marble lobbies with mannequins dressed like movie stars and clerks who offered gentle smiles without hovering. It was not about flash. It was about feel. You could smell the faint scent of perfume wafting from the counters. Suits were tailored. Bags were carefully wrapped. Even the lighting seemed designed to make you feel special. Robinson's was where mothers took their daughters to learn about style, grace, and confidence. It was the backdrop to countless graduations, anniversaries, and quiet, powerful moments. Its wedding registry was practically a rite of passage. But with time, even beauty needs a buyer. As the retail world shifted toward convenience and price tags over experience, Robinson's merged with May Company and eventually disappeared into a blur of sameness. The stores were rebranded, the elegance stripped, the final bows tied. What once made people feel quietly magnificent was replaced with fluorescent lights and cluttered clearance racks. When we traded charm for cheapness, did we save money or lose something bigger? Pup and Taco was one of those places that never made it all the way across the country. But for Californians, it was a staple. You knew what to expect: a wide menu, dirt cheap prices, and a name that sounded like it was made up by a kid. Hot dogs, tacos, burgers, fries, slushies, they threw it all at the wall and somehow it worked. You could walk up, grab a chili dog and a taco, and be out in 5 minutes for under $3. The locations were easy to spot too. Those retro signs with the big red and yellow block letters were a beacon to beach bums and budget-conscious teens alike. There was nothing gourmet about it, but that was never the point. It was fast, it was greasy, and it was loved. So much so, in fact, that Taco Bell bought most of the locations in the 1980s, essentially absorbing Pup and Taco into its own empire. The quirky name might be gone, but the spirit lives on every time someone adds a side of nachos to their burrito order. And while Pup and Taco ruled the roadside, our next stop was the king of the mall food court. Soft, warm, twisted, and salted. The pretzel that walked so others could run. Radio Shack. You did not go to Radio Shack to shop. You went there to touch. The moment you walked through the door, it was like stepping onto a spaceship. Racks of wires, batteries, and gadgets you had never even heard of. And in the middle of it all, the demo table, a flashing, beeping paradise. Dad would say, "We're just browsing," but an hour later, he was still pressing buttons, turning knobs, and pretending he was building a satellite in the garage. You would find the mini keyboard and try to play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" while he talked tech with the teenage clerk behind the counter. Every once in a while, he would point at something and say, "I had one of these back in college," even if he definitely did not. He would pick up a transistor radio, weigh it in his hand like a jeweler inspecting a rare gem, and give a long, low whistle. Solid piece of work. He never bought anything over $20, but you always walked out feeling like you had been part of a NASA mission. If imagination had a store, it was that one. And right around the corner from that tech wonderland, a pet store where you begged and begged and somehow always walked out with something in a plastic bag. The American Motors Corporation was not supposed to die. It was supposed to be the little guy that held the line. In a market dominated by giants like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, AMC dared to be different. It gave us the Gremlin, the Hornet, and the Pacer, cars that looked like nothing else on the road. But that difference came at a cost. AMC was always scrambling for cash. Its designs were bold, but sometimes too bold. The Pacer was called a fishbowl on wheels. The Gremlin looked like a prank gone too far. And while America was falling in love with fuel efficiency and sleek imports, AMC clung to its oddball identity. It tried to innovate. It partnered with Renault. It launched the Eagle, a car that would inspire the modern SUV. But none of it was enough. The market was cruel. Interest rates climbed. Gas prices jumped. AMC fell behind on everything: production, marketing, even public opinion. By the time Chrysler bought it out in the late 1980s, it was already a ghost. People do not talk much about AMC now, but they should. Because it tried. It really tried. And in the end, that might be what hurts most. VIP's restaurant was the kind of place that never made the national spotlight. But ask anyone from Oregon or Washington and you'll hear the same thing. It was like Denny's, only better. Cozy booths with cracked faux leather seats, mugs of coffee that never emptied, and a menu that served breakfast all day like it was doing you a personal favor. It was the sort of spot where truckers, college students, and night owls all blended together under the warm hum of fluorescent lighting. You could walk in at 2 in the morning and still get a full plate of pancakes, bacon, and hash browns that tasted like home. There was nothing flashy about VIPs, but that was exactly its charm. It was consistent, comforting, and totally unbothered by the fast-moving world outside. In the late 1980s, Denny's swooped in and bought up most of the locations, rebranding them and replacing that unmistakable local flavor with something more corporate. But folks from the Pacific Northwest still remember the coffee-stained menus, the quiet clatter of forks, and the waitresses who called you Han without blinking. If VIPs was all about comfort and familiarity, our next stop decided to flip the script. With rotisserie chicken, celebrity backing, and a brief moment in the cultural sun thanks to one very famous sitcom. Some nights, it was the backyard. Other times, it was the town planetarium where the air smelled like metal seats and carpet glue. But either way, Dad made sure you always looked up. He would point at a blinking light in the sky and say something like, "That one's Venus," even if it was just an airplane. You believed him, because he said it with the same certainty he used when fixing the lawnmower. Sometimes he would bring out a telescope that never quite focused right, but it did not matter. You could see the moon, or at least a very bright blur that had to be the moon, and that was enough. He told you about constellations, meteor showers, and a comet he swore he saw when he was 12. The planetarium nights were just as magical. You would lean back in those creaky seats while the ceiling lit up with galaxies and a deep voice narrated the birth of stars. Dad would whisper facts like he had a PhD in astronomy, even if he probably read them from the brochure 5 minutes before. You did not go to learn. You went to dream. And the only thing better than dreaming about space? Digging through the universe of stuff at the local flea market the very next weekend. High Karate aftershave was a joke and a phenomenon all at once. It came in a cheap bottle with a commercial that turned masculinity into a parody of itself. Spray this on, and women would attack you. Literally. The ads were absurd, over the top, and completely unforgettable. But behind the humor was a surprisingly decent scent. High Karate became the go-to for teenage boys trying to smell grown-up and grown men trying to stay playful. It was the cologne you found in your dad's drawer next to the tie clips and old movie stubs. But the joke wore thin. Trends shifted. The 1980s wanted power and polish, not camp and chaos. High Karate was quietly discontinued. Stores stopped stocking it. The bottles became rare. Today, it is a punchline for some and a scent memory for others. A whiff of what it meant to be young, to be bold, to believe that a fragrance could change everything. Zantiggo Mexican restaurant may not be a household name anymore, but for a stretch of time, it gave Taco Bell a serious run for its money. Founded in the Midwest, Zantiggo offered something just a little different. A menu that felt more daring, more flavorful, and somehow more authentic, even if it was all fast food. The crown jewel was the Chilito, a cheesy, spicy, burrito-like creation that sparked a cult following. You could argue all day about what made it so good. Some said it was the chili, others swore by the soft tortilla, but everyone agreed on one thing: it was addictive. Eventually, Taco Bell swooped in, acquired the chain, and folded many of the locations into their own branding. For years, the Chilito lived on in whispers and nostalgia forums until a small revival brought Zantiggo back in limited form in Minnesota. But for most of us, it is just a flavor memory now. A quick lunch on a chilly day with steam rising from the wrapper. Speaking of wrappers and warmth, our next place was more than a pizzeria. It was a velvet-curtained hideaway with mob-themed charm and pizza that meant business. The strip mall pet store did not smell like adventure. It smelled like wood shavings and fish food. But when Dad said, "Let's stop in for a minute," you knew it meant 20. The walls were lined with glass tanks full of turtles, frogs, and fish that looked too bright to be real. You would press your nose against the glass and point. "That one. I want that one." Dad would shake his head and smile. "We're not getting a turtle." 5 minutes later, you were holding a goldfish in a plastic bag, trying not to spill it on the seat of the car. He was not a pushover. He just knew the power of a memory. And that pet store, as humble as it was, felt like a mini zoo to you. There was always one sleepy lizard under a heat lamp and a parrot that squawked like a broken doorbell. Sometimes you would hear, "Hey there," from across the room and realize the bird was mocking you. Dad would strike up a conversation with the guy behind the counter like they were old war buddies, swapping advice on filters and food pellets. You would head home with a tank, a packet of food, and a new responsibility you were not quite ready for. And when you were ready for something outdoorsy, Dad knew just the place, with canoes and no life jackets in sight. Oldsmobile was the brand your grandfather trusted. It was dependable, steady, and proudly American. In the 1970s, it was one of General Motors' most successful lines. The Cutlass was everywhere. Parking lots, driveways, high school graduation gifts. It was a badge of middle-class confidence. But times changed. Japanese automakers brought new efficiency. The luxury market moved to BMW and Mercedes-Benz. And Oldsmobile struggled to define itself. Was it sporty? Was it classic? Was it for young drivers or retirees? The answers never came. Designs grew stale. Performance lagged. The name Oldsmobile started to feel like a joke no one wanted to explain. By the time they rebranded, no one was listening. And the name started to sound old. By the 1990s, Oldsmobile felt like a brand out of time. Sales dropped. Dealers lost faith. General Motors tried to rebrand it, update it, give it a new face. But it was too late. The final Oldsmobile rolled off the line in 2004. For decades, it was the quiet heart of the American road. And then it was gone. Not with a crash, but with a sigh. A slow fade into silence. And if you ever drove one, you remember. The smell of the vinyl seats, the hum of the engine on a long drive. Oldsmobile did not just fail. It retired. The Oddball Roadside Museum was where logic went to take a nap. You saw the hand-painted sign from the highway. "Come see the world's largest pencil," or "America's first toaster still works." Dad would swerve into the gravel lot like it was destiny. Admission was cheap, $3 cash only, and worth every penny. The inside was a fever dream. Display cases filled with bottle caps from all 50 states. A whole wall dedicated to vintage shampoo bottles. A two-headed taxidermy calf that haunted your dreams for a week. "You brought the kid today, huh?" he would say, as if Dad came here weekly. You followed them through rooms of strange collections while Dad laughed and read every single placard out loud. It was like watching a kid in a candy store, only the candy was lawn darts, Pez dispensers, and World War II ration kits. "Now this," Dad would say, holding up a glass jar with something floating in it. This is history. And even though you rolled your eyes, part of you agreed. But if you really want to feel history in motion, just wait until you join him by the old train tracks, watching boxcars roll by, counting like your life depended on it. Roy Rogers restaurants were like a little piece of the Wild West dropped into your suburban strip mall. Named after the cowboy icon himself, this place stood out by offering more than just burgers. Sure, they had roast beef sandwiches and fried chicken that made fast food feel home-cooked, but the real magic? The Fixin's Bar, a glorious buffet of condiments, toppings, and extras that turned a plain sandwich into your own custom creation. Lettuce, pickles, onions, jalapenos, barbecue sauce, horseradish, you name it. It was all very yeehaw, but make it fast. For a time in the 1980s, Roy Rogers had a strong presence along the East Coast and highway rest stops, becoming a favorite for travelers and locals alike. Eventually, competition from giants like McDonald's and Wendy's squeezed them out of many markets. But those who remember still talk about it fondly, especially that legendary Fixin's Bar. And speaking of names that never quite fit, our next restaurant had an identity so split it changed from a queen to a druther, yet still stayed as comforting as ever. The community swap meet in the church parking lot was a patchwork quilt of folding tables, lawn chairs, and a whole lot of neighborhood hustle. It was always held early, way too early, and Dad would pull up with a thermos of coffee and a plan. This was not a place for big spenders. This was a battlefield of bartering. He would go straight to the tables stacked with transistor radios, old tools, and that mysterious plastic bin full of tangled cords that might be useful someday. You were eyeing the table with the mismatched action figures and board games missing all the pieces. There was always one guy who sold nothing but Velvet Elvis paintings. No one ever saw him set up or pack up. He was just there. The swap meet had its regulars. The Tupperware lady with 1,000 lids and no matching containers. The comic guy who only sold back issues from 1974. And the woman with jars of jelly that looked more suspicious than sweet. But Dad? He moved through it all like a seasoned pro, chatting with everyone like they were old buddies, walking away with something bizarre like a minifan or a set of ceramic pigs, and when he said, "Let's stop by the junkyard real quick," you knew things were about to get even stranger. Espree was not just fashion. It was a feeling. Youthful, bright, alive. The brand captured a moment when clothes were not just about style, but about saying something. About the world, about identity, about freedom. In the 1970s and 1980s, Espree exploded across America. Their catalogs were works of art. Their stores were full of color and energy. It felt like the future. You walked into Espree and felt like the main character in your own story. It was clothes for the bold, not just the fashionable. But fashion moves fast. By the 1990s, trends were changing. Grunge came in, minimalism followed, and Espree's cheerful aesthetic felt out of place. Management changed, expansion overreached, and what once felt vibrant now felt dated. Sales dipped, stores closed. By the early 2000s, Espree in the United States was nearly extinct. It survived in Europe and Asia for a while longer, but the magic had faded. For a certain generation, Espree was the brand they wore to school dances, to mall hangouts, to first dates. It was more than fabric. It was memory, stitched into every sleeve. Now it is a whisper from a closet that no longer opens. Lums was born from a hot dog stand and became something like a fever dream of mid-century Americana meets tiki bar chic. Founded in Miami, this oddball restaurant chain made a name for itself with its signature beer-steamed hot dogs. Yes, beer-steamed. It sounds weird until you try it. The result was a hot dog with just a hint of hoppy goodness, nestled in a bun that soaked it all up like a sponge. But Lums was more than just its dogs. It had fried clams, tiki drinks, and decor that made you feel like you had wandered into a vacation. Palm fronds, bamboo, and plastic parrots set the tone. The vibe was easygoing, slightly eccentric, and always a little bit boozy, even if you were just there for the onion rings. At its peak, Lums had hundreds of locations, including one right on the Las Vegas Strip. But as the 80s rolled on, the novelty wore off and the chain dwindled. Still, if you ever sat down at Lums with a giant menu, a plate of clams, and a tall frosty mug, you know it had a strange magic. But if Lums was all about weird combinations, the next place made celebrations the main course, with parades, sirens, and a dessert so big they dared you to finish it. The dairy farm drive-thru felt like something out of a storybook. You did not get out of the car. You just rolled forward slowly on a gravel path that crunched under the tires like popcorn, while the smell of hay and cream filled the air. Wooden signs pointed the way. Milk, cream, eggs, and sometimes fresh butter today. Dad would pull up to the window, nod at the farmhand, and exchange a couple of glass bottles like they were precious cargo. You could hear them clinking together softly in the metal crate behind the seat, already cold with condensation. If you had been on your best behavior, meaning no backseat bickering and no complaints during the wait, he would ask the real question, "You want a cone?" It was always a yes. The scoop was big, the cone was soggy by the time you were halfway through, and somehow it still tasted like heaven. Sometimes Dad would get one too and say, "Best $2 I ever spent." And as the cows in the distance mooed lazily and the sun painted gold across the field, you realized simple things could feel grand. But if you think that was charming, just wait until you step inside the used bookstore that sold both dusty novels and ham radios whispering from across the country. PanAmerican World Airways was not just a brand. It was a symbol, a ticket to the world stamped in blue and white, with flight attendants in crisp uniforms and ads that made the world seem smaller and more elegant. For much of the 20th century, flying Pan Am meant you had made it. But by the 1970s, the cracks were showing. Oil prices spiked, air travel deregulated, competition exploded, and Pan Am, bloated with international routes and expensive aircraft, could not adapt fast enough. It tried new services, rebranded its cabins, and even launched a short-lived domestic push. But nothing stuck. The glory days were gone, and the bills kept coming. By the early 1990s, it was over. Planes grounded, staff laid off, logos fading from airports and travel posters. For many Americans, Pan Am was their first flight, their first window seat, their first glimpse of the clouds from above. To watch it fall felt like watching the future turn to dust. It was more than a business loss. It was a goodbye to the golden age of travel. The ground round was chaos, comfort, and childhood all wrapped into one. It was the kind of place where parents could get a beer and a burger while their kids threw peanut shells on the ground like it was encouraged. Because it was. The floors were covered in crunchy peanut bits. The air was filled with laughter and the faint smell of popcorn. There were projectors running old cartoons on the wall and kids with balloons trailing behind them like little parade floats. It was loud, it was joyful, and best of all, it felt like no one was trying to rush you out. The ground round leaned into its identity, part sports bar, part family funhouse. There was even a time when the cost of your meal was based on your weight. No, seriously, it was all part of the strange charm that kept people coming back. But as dining trends shifted and the novelty faded, so did the chain. Still, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the crunch of a peanut shell underfoot. But if you were more into burgers and football than cartoons and chaos, our next place might have been your regular haunt. The Dented Can discount grocery store was the kind of place you never admitted shopping at, unless you were Dad. Then it was a badge of honor. You did not bring a list here. You brought instincts. Aisles of unlabeled tins, faded labels, and cardboard signs scribbled in permanent marker, 10 cans for $1. What cans? Who knew? Dad would hold one up and say, "Beef chunks and gravy." Sounds promising, like he was about to enter it in a cooking competition. Most of the time it was mystery meat roulette, but we were not there for the menu. We were there for the thrill. He treated the whole store like an auction. "Name brand beans. Get them while they last," he would whisper, like a man uncovering buried treasure. At checkout, he would proudly announce how much he saved. Never mind the fact that dinner might be spaghetti and something we would call tomato adjacent. You learned to laugh, to try everything once, and to realize a meal made on the cheap still meant you had one. But for a different kind of treasure, tucked away in someone's garage, let me tell you about the model train shop that made time stand still. In the late 1970s, Vidal Sassoon was more than a brand. It was a movement. The salons, the products, the commercials. If you do not look good, we do not look good. It was bold, sharp, and full of promise. The Vidal Sassoon salons offered high-end haircuts with a modern edge. Women felt transformed. Men took notice. It was more than a trim. It was a lifestyle. You were not just getting a haircut. You were getting modernized, elevated, made new. For many, it was the first time they felt stylish instead of simply presentable. But like many trends, it struggled to evolve. The early 1980s brought new fashion rules, big hair, wild volume. Sassoon's geometric precision began to feel too rigid, too old. Franchises thinned. The elite vibe became a burden, not a benefit. Meanwhile, cheaper salons, home styling kits, and new celebrity stylists flooded the market. The salons faded. The products moved to drugstore shelves. And the name that once meant sophistication became just another bottle in the aisle. But there was a time, brief, electric, when getting your hair done at Vidal Sassoon felt like stepping into the future. And losing that future stung more than people admit. There were no signs, no trails, and definitely no cell reception. Not that it mattered. The hidden fishing hole Dad always took you to might as well have been a secret passed down through generations. You had to park on a dirt shoulder, hop a barbed wire fence, and walk through brush that snagged at your socks like it wanted you to turn back. But then, there it was. A quiet patch of water framed by trees and pure silence. No people, just frogs, the buzz of dragonflies, and the occasional splash of something just out of sight. Dad would hand you a rod, already rigged, and say, "Let's see if they're biting today," like it was a ritual. He always had a story about the one that got away, usually involving a fish the size of your leg and a broken line. You never saw it, but you believed him. And on the days you did catch something, even if it was just a bluegill the size of a cookie, he would hoot and holler like you had just pulled up Moby Dick. You would sit there side by side, quiet except for the occasional snack or Dad humming an old tune. But if you want to hear about the reward after a good fishing trip, let me take you to the drive-through dairy farm. Glass bottles, cold milk, and maybe even ice cream. Sambos restaurant was once everywhere. At its peak, over 1,000 locations dotted the American map, and for a time, it was the breakfast joint. You walked in, saw the tiger stripe motif, and knew pancakes were on the way. The food was solid. Fluffy pancakes, greasy bacon, big mugs of diner coffee. The kind of breakfast that left you needing a nap by 10 in the morning. But Sambos' legacy is tangled. Its name and branding, drawn from a children's book with racist origins, sparked increasing backlash as public awareness and cultural conversations shifted. People started asking hard questions about what a restaurant should represent. The food stayed consistent, but the reputation cracked. One by one, locations closed or rebranded. And while the last original Sambos held on until 2020, even it finally changed names. Still, to many who grew up in its booths, it was not about the name. It was about pancake mornings with family and kids' meals with tiger-striped coloring books. But from syrupy stacks to something a little more British, the next forgotten favorite took a trip across the Atlantic and served up deep-fried nostalgia with a dash of malt vinegar. There was a time when TWA meant elegance, a time when stepping onto a Trans-World Airlines flight was like entering a luxury hotel in the sky. The seats were wide, the service crisp, the logo iconic. From movie stars to newlyweds, everyone wanted to fly TWA. It was part of the golden age of air travel. But by the 1970s, the clouds were darkening. Deregulation hit hard. New competitors raced into the skies, offering faster routes and cheaper fares. Fuel prices soared, labor disputes dragged on, and TWA's once glorious reputation began to buckle. What once felt like flying with royalty now felt outdated and expensive. Suddenly, the airline of tomorrow had become yesterday's news. It expanded too quickly, bought too many jets, and could not keep up with the ruthless economics of modern air travel. Bankruptcy became a familiar word. By the time American Airlines absorbed what remained in the early 2000s, the brand was already a shadow. Airports removed the signs, crews traded uniforms, but the memory lingered. For anyone who flew TWA during its heyday, there was nothing like it. Now, it is a name buried under decades of debt and nostalgia, a ghost with wings. If you felt that spark, give this video a like, subscribe for more lost treasures, and share the feeling down in the comments below.